Hey Deepak,
Hey Girish, how are you?
I'm doing good, thank you. I hope you are also doing good.
Yes, I'm doing good.
So let's wait for a few more minutes before everybody can.
Yeah, sure.
Hi Aditya Pritam.
Hi Girish.
Hi Girish.
So shall we start? Or do we want to wait for more participants?
I think we can wait 2 to 3 more minutes.
Okay.
Then I think we can start.
Sure. I have shared my screen. I hope you guys are able to see the screen contents.
Yes, Girish, it's visible.
I believe we can start, right?
Yes, I think we can start.
Okay. So the last session, it was all about giving you an introduction of what we did for implementing RESTful APIs in Office, and it didn't have any actual examples as such. It was all about providing you introduction. So this time around, if you see the agenda, I'm basically focusing on what all pre-configured resources are there, and then I will also walk you guys through the standard API responses that are supported out of the box. And then briefly, we will also be talking about the content negotiation that's happening at the moment. At the moment, the API only supports JSON, and I'm also working on supporting other media types as well. For example, XML and multi-part. So I'll cut to the chase and quickly start showing you the various resources that I have configured here in Postman. And by the way, I actually sent you the Postman collection URL as well for you guys to import it and run the examples locally. So I'll just start my Office instance. So as you can see, the first pre-configured resource that I'm going to be talking about is the one that generates authentication token. So if you can see, it basically resides here at auth token. And it is basically listening on the post request. So post method, sorry. So here you can see that I have configured this authentication token request, and you can see the URL. What it does is that it asks you for username, password, and that's basically the party that exists in Office, and it is basically requiring you to provide the details using basic authentication. So here you can see that I have specified basic auth, and username password here is admin, and password is Office. So if I hit here, it should get me the JWT authentication token. Here you can see this is the standard success response. Status code is 200 and status description is okay. And the success message it is showing is that token granted. And the data is something that is going to be constant, and whatever resides underneath is basically coming from OFBiz service that is being called. So here you can see that access token is there. I am actually using the JWT manager that is bundled with OFBiz. And then you can see token type, that's bearer token, and the expires in property is showing that it is going to expire in 1800 seconds. So that's the first basically resource that you are going to hit if you want to call any of this service. In the meantime, I will also like to show you the Swagger implementation that we have done. So here you can see that all the resources that are configured here, they are being shown here in Swagger UI. So the one that we just hit, actually, it is showing up here, authentication token generating resource, and you can actually see the details of what are the required parameters and headers that it requires. And I'm also going to take a detailed Swagger related meeting, but I'll also I'll like to show you how you can actually hit this particular request using Swagger. So here you can see that one authorize button is showing up. It actually is showing what all various authentication mechanism this API is supporting, API as a whole. So here you can specify admin and password as always. Once you click authorize, it stores these credentials internally, and then when you invoke try it out button, it will execute the same URL that we hit here using basic authentication, because we have specified here authorization parameter, and internally we have specified that this particular HTTP requests is basically is going to use basic authentication. So if I click execute, you can actually see that the request was received by OFBiz here, and here's the response body, the 200 response. So there are basically three ways you can actually access OFBiz APIs. I mean, using Swagger UI, then you have got the choice of using Postman, and obviously for non-GUI guys, you can also use curl requests. Now I'm going to show you the openapi resource. openapi resource is basically nothing but a resource that generates JSON file or YAML file, and the return JSON or YAML file is basically nothing but openapi's spec file. So here you can see that it resides here openapi.json under context, and the context is basically REST. So if I click send, here you can see that the system generated OpenAPI spec file in JSON format. And it's a detailed specification. You can actually go through the specification details. But what I'm doing here is I'm just using Swagger API to generate the OpenAPI spec file. And when you click on Swagger UI, it actually hits this URL to get the JSON file or YAML file, and then basically it renders and it presents you whatever is there in the API specification file, and it renders you nicely. So here you can see one authentication token generating resource, and the other one is the exported services that I'm going to be talking about next. And here you can see various schemas that the system generates automatically. The schemas are nothing but, you can basically use schemas to configure all the requests and response that you want to be associating with a particular URL. And then there is WADL resource. WADL is basically an abbreviation for Web Application Description Language. It is nothing but analogous to what WSDL is for SOAP. So most of you guys are aware of what SOAP is and what WSDL is. So in REST world, you have got WADL. It's also an XML format, and it also lists all the various resources that are configured in your API. So this is application.wadl that's residing under REST, and here application.wadl. here you can see that all the resources are configured here. So you got the base resource, that's raised, and then there are child resources, auth, then token that we just talked about, and then you can see the services resource as well. That's where all the exportable services are inside. And here under resource, you can actually see the child methods or child resources that are configured. And here you can also see the open API resource that is also that we talked about earlier. Um, I'll show you an example of how YAML can be created. So that's the open API resource that is configured to send YAML file. Here you can see the file is actually in YAML format, and if you just change it to JSON, it's going to output the same specification but in JSON form. Okay, any questions so far?
So Girish, sorry, I haven't attended your last session, but just curious to know that we can configure the custom resource as well, like, right?
Yeah.
The res.xml file, so that we can have, we don't need to export all the services. We can have the custom resource mapping and can call the Groovy and services for that part as well, right?
Yeah. So
Okay, great.
yeah, I'm not actually covering that part because it would be lengthy. So for today's session, I'm only considering the exportable services, and the next section I'll be basically covering the custom resources that you talked about.
Okay, great. Actually, I just saw the WADL file and it's showing the services part. So just want to curious to know about that.
Yeah.
Custom mapping. Yeah. Okay, cool. Thank you, Girish.
So now, as Deepak mentioned earlier, the services endpoint is nothing but where all the exportable services are going to reside. So if you have any service in OFBiz that is marked as exportable true and an action attribute defined as get, post, patch, delete, etc., then that service is going to appear under this resource, the exportable services resource. So it's base path services, and then the second part is nothing but the name of the service that you want to call. And I have actually configured one services resource that's basically listening on the get method that actually sends you, oops, the header, the token actually expired. Let me grab the fresh one and then provide it. So if you hit this endpoint, it actually shows you all the configured exportable services. So here you can see the name as create product, and here the link is nothing but RESTful way of basically you can say specifying the association of this particular service with itself or the other related resources. So here I have just included relation as self, and it is actually specifying the href attribute, which is actually pointing where this particular service can be accessed. Second service is find product by ID, and you can basically see the same thing happening over here for find product by ID and then get product. And it's inconsistent with what you are seeing over here. So create product is defined as post, find product ID get and get product as get. I'll show you how these are configured in the XML file. So just for the purpose of demonstration, get product is actually not exportable. Just for the demonstration purpose, I made it exportable, and then action defined as get. Similarly, for I believe find product ID is already exportable, so no surprises over there. Export to, I just specified action as get, because if the service is exportable but the action is not defined, then you're not going to get this service listed over here. System won't allow to be accessible because.
Can I quickly ask here? Sorry to interrupt you. In a true RESTful API, you would define this as get product / with its ID. Yeah, put the ID as part of the URL. Are you thinking of moving to that at some point? Because we have an extensive and defined entity model in OFBiz.
Exactly.
So it should be easy to move to a full standard REST API instead of simply calling services only. Is that somewhere on the roadmap? Am I missing something?
Yes, exactly, Carsten. That's actually already implemented, but the scope of this particular discussion is only to cover the services that are exposed via,
Okay.
So that's also coming up, but probably in the next session or the one after, I'll be covering that part as well, where you will be able to specify the more, you can say truly RESTful resources. Okay. So this is, where was I? So yeah, find product ID, the export equals to true and action equals to get. So that's listed over here. And then create product is an example of post service that I included here. There it is. Export is true and action is post. So I'll execute them one by one, starting with let's say get product. It's basically specified as get. So if you look at the service definition of get product, you can actually see that an attribute product ID is defined with mode as in. Now what the system does is, when it tries to generate the OpenAPI specification for the service, it looks for the various in attributes for specifying the request body and various out attributes for specifying the response body. So if you can see here, get product. For one thing to note is that since get requests, they are not supposed to have request bodies. So there is a difference in how you access a service defined as get versus put, patch, and post. So for get requests, you will have to specify a request parameter named in params that will basically compose of the service in attributes specified in JSON format. So here the system reads that the get product needs product ID as in parameter and the optional is false. So the in parameters becomes required, and it is showing an example how you can access this particular service. So you will have to just specify product ID with the value that you want to fetch. So I'll try to execute it. Let me just get fresh token. And specify it over here. So the in params, one thing I forgot to mention is that this in params value, it has to be URL encoded, right? So you cannot just specify the JSON string as it is. because it has to be URL encoded. So you will, if you are a programmer, you are developing, you will just use JavaScript to just encode the string, JSON string. Here I'll just use this website to provide me URL encoded format for this JSON. I will encode. And I'll just use this encoded string over here and specify as the in-param value. And let's say, let's try to hit it and see if it returns the product that we are looking for. So you can actually see that the service ran and the out attribute that was specified as generic value, it was actually marshaled into JSON and sent back to the client. I'm actually trying to be, have some standard success and error responses. That's why you would always see this standard pattern of, specifying responses, wherein, a status code of 200 or anything starting with 2 will indicate success, and then there will be status description, and whatever payload that the service is basically outputting, it is going to be part of this data element, so that for JavaScript clients or for any other client for that matter, they will just have to look for the data element, and they can just check the status code and then just look for data element to see if there is any response, if there is any payload. So this pretty much covers the GET request, and that's basic example. And if you want, I can show you find product by ID as well. We will just have to change the token, and then find product ID actually requires 4 parameters. Yeah, so you can see all those 4 in attributes are actually rendered over here. You'll have to specify ID to find, search all ID, good identification type ID, and search product first. So, and I believe since ID to find is mandatory, then you have to specify only ID to find. I'll just change ID to find. Then encode it. And you can see that the ID to find service ran over here. And actually it returned the same response as the get product return. This covers the GET request, and there is actually one more service that I wrote that's part of a separate demo plugin. Let me just start it, and I'll show you how a service that returns list of generic values can be called. These are the services. It's specified as export to action gate, and it is actually actually returning all product categories. Let's hit Sugar UI. See if presents you the other services as well. So here you can actually see, you will see two additional services. One is get and the other one is post. The one we are going to be hitting is get all category service. So if you look into it's a service definition, it is accepting nothing. It's just a simple service that basically gets all the product services, all the product categories, and then it basically sends you the data. So let me call it. So here you can see that the service actually ran, and it is basically returning all the categories available in the system. So that's one example of how a service that's returning list or any complex object can be marshaled and presented over here. So the attribute name is categories. Its type is as list, and mode is out. One thing you might have noticed is that as part of this implementation, we have also tried to introduce, to provide nested attributes. The way these nested attributes help is, to basically allow the system to specify the request and response. Um, Properties for services. So for example, get all category services. Here you can see that since there was no input parameter, so okay, I need to basically fix this, that if there is no input parameter defined, then this in params should not be over here, should not be present at all. So just look at the response. Here you can see that the status code 200 is showing, and it is showing that that's the example value of a 200 response that the client can expect. Here you can see that categories is there, and then category name and category ID is there. So it was all possible because we actually specified what the exact the content of the list is going to be, even though the service is actually returning everything. But being able to specify what exact contents of that list is going to be, it basically helps the consuming client to actually make changes accordingly. Similar thing is going to happen for in parameters as well. If you specify, I'll show you with a post example, wherein I'm actually specifying categories actually as input parameter and list, and here is I'm specifying the nested attribute. I'll move on to a post example, that's create product. That's a very simple example that I took. It is actually going to call create product service. And if we look at the documentation generated for create product, you can see that it's listed as post, then content type, it expects content type as application.json, and the request body. The request body is coming from this service. It calculates the in attributes for this particular service, and then basically it lists over here. So let's try to create a product. you're not going to be specifying any parameters. I have specified bearer token, and you will be specifying body. So body is going to be residing here. Let's say specify test product name 1 and product type ID. Let's hope it creates a product. Unsupported. Okay. So here you can see that I specified content type as application.json, and then it actually created a product in the system, and it returned whatever the service returned. So the service is actually specifying that there is an inout parameter. So the service is actually returning the product ID that was created, the primary key, and we are doing nothing but just returning that product ID that was created, 10160. Any questions on post services?
Girish, I have a question just discussion sort of thing. As I remember in OFBiz, we do not allow the get param in service. I am exactly not remember the root cause. I think it's due to some sort of security issue or sort of thing. So like here we are using the get. So I think you can check on that part as well, why we are not allowing the get things. I think there is an open issues as well for that part of thing. So
yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, so just want to make sure that you covered that part as well and handle that the security or the vulnerabilities issues that was reported at that time. I exactly not remember the Jira ID, but if you check this service validation part of thing, at that code that it's mentioned that due to security or some sort of issues, we are not allowing get for the service in parameters.
Okay, get. You mean the the method get actually?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, I'll check on that. I wasn't aware.
Yeah. Yes. So actually, on the comment section, I think there is a Jira ticket also mentioned. You can find the detail over as well.
Okay.
It might possible that right now it's not relevant, or it might be possible that you can check and update as required.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And second part is that Girish, in case of Swagger UI, we list the in and out param. So yeah. So is there any possibility to mark the required parameter as well on the UI side? Like suppose in case of post service, there is a 2 param that are required. So can we have some sort of UI or indicator that these fields are required so that the implementation or the developer make sure that these values passes while calling the APIs or sort of thing?
Yeah, so I believe you are probably mentioning, say, for example, internal name is required, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So I believe that should be covered over here in the schema part. What I was showing is the example value, and here if on schema, you can actually see the various elements that need to be be part of the request. One thing I probably have not covered here is that I am probably not checking whether the parameter is required or not required. I believe there should be a way for me to be able to specify, for example, let's say product fit. There has to be some way so that it can actually
required.
Was required. Yeah. So that is something.
Yes.
Yeah. I know what you are saying. So that is something that we can explore and possibly include as well, because obviously For example, a service of this type accepting all these parameters, it's going to be very difficult for the API consumer to actually, they will be probably at a loss what to specify and what not to specify.
Yes, yes. Actually, and it will be a great help for the developer while implementation, so that they can know what kind of parameter we have to mandatory pass, and so that our server respond properly, and we do not get the hit and try thing. Okay, great. Thank thank you, Girish. I am done. I think I think one more will future request or the future upgrade will be that like if we define the nested parameter. So while in case of out we or the service out only the mentioned parameter, not all. Like in case of category, you mentioned the category name and ID.
Yeah.
So yeah, that may be a future update or code, but that would be also great. Like suppose in an entity you have the a number of fields and you want to out only 2 fields, then you mention it and the developer get only those 2 fields.
Exactly.
Awesome.
I get what you are saying. Yeah, that's on the card actually, and it would be
Yes.
more like GraphQL way of doing things, because one session I took earlier regarding GraphQL, where I had mentioned that one of the advantages of GraphQL is that you can actually specify what you want to fetch from
Yes.
the
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you, Girish. Thanks for the good work. Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah. So if you want, I can hop on to our next agenda item here.
I think we have one question from Preetham on chat as well.
Go ahead, Preetham.
Yeah, I was just asking about is there any way to bypass the authentication for the services?
Yeah,
Like some services are can be directly accessed without the access token, right?
exactly.
So what is that way? How we can do that?
Yeah, I mean, so if there was one, I mean, this was actually implemented very recently. So if a service is specified as not requiring authentication, so you don't need to actually specify the authorization token. One thing that needs to be that we need to keep in mind is that if there is an authorization header with the token, then the system will assume that you want to authorize. So better not include any authorization header for services that don't require any that don't require any authentication or authorization. So that is something that is achievable as well. So the system will just bypass any token checking for such services that are configured as auth false.
So I need to configure that in the service definition.
Yeah, I
Right.
believe. Yeah, so I believe auth is false by default, right?
No, I think it's in case of XML, it's true by default, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, there is in XML is different, and there is a conflict in definition part and implementation part.
Okay.
So, okay. So like Preetham here, like Girish is demonstrating only the service part. So in case of service, if you want to bypass the auth, you have to mention the auth false in service definition itself. And like as Girish as well told that he will demonstrate in next or next to next session regarding the custom resource mapping. In that part, we can configure the authentication, I think at resource level. So that may be in the next session or the next, right, Girish?
Yeah, I'll just try to give you an glimpse of what the thing looks like. So here you are just specifying resources, then specifying operations, various operations that can be listed. So you can actually see that the paths are actually the more RESTful path actually. So paths is there, then you can specify path parameters, then features, and then feature ID, and then just it just goes on basically. So I'll be covering up in the next sessions.
Yeah, got that. Yeah, thank you, Girish.
I'll just talk briefly about the various API responses that the endpoints actually return. You have actually seen the status code of 200. Let me just these are the response headers, and okay, the status code is listed over here, 200. Okay. So obviously, if for example you are trying to access a resource, for example this particular resource, the authentication resource, if you don't specify correct username or password and just try to hit it, then you will actually see that it is sending you 401 response. That stands for unauthorized, right? So if you are trying to access this resource without specifying correct username, password, then it is going to send you 401 response. Then we can try to cover 400 bad requests. Say for example, you're trying to hit a post service, that's create product, and one of the parameters or one of the attributes that the service is specifying as required, you're not passing that parameter, for example. So if you omit that parameter, let's say we take out internal name, try to hit the service. So you can see it is actually sending 400 bad requests. What it is saying is that there is an error at the client side because the client API consumer did not provide the correct request required to fulfill this particular request. Here you can see I'm specifying error type as service validation exception. So we are essentially, mapping the various exceptions that is thrown by OFBiz into the appropriate HTTP status codes. Here error message is nothing but that is derived from the service. It is saying that the create product internal name was missing. You can actually see there is here is some duplicacy. Additional errors is also specifying the same. I'll probably take one of them out, the error description or additional errors. So this actually covers 400 part, that's bad request. Coming to 422 unprocessable entity. So this is actually an extension to the HTTP specification, and soon it is going to be part of HTTP specification itself. So what it actually indicates is that the request was proper in the sense that there was no malformed JSON or XML. For example, some tag is missing, or simply JSON cannot be parsed properly, or XML cannot be parsed properly. The 420 is basically indicating that the request was proper. It's just that there was some exception because it did not meet the required criteria. For example, you can actually see, for example, let's say is variant, right? It's actually defined as I believe Boolean in the service definition. So it only accepts Y or N. But for example, if I specify it as yes, and then try to hit the service. So you are actually seeing this 422 response. So service validation ran fine. It was not part of service validation, but it was actually when it tried to insert that record in the database. That's where it encountered this exception, and here in the error description you are actually seeing the root cause of that exception. It is showing that a truncation error was encountered trying to shrink char yes to length 1. So you can actually see that is variant had to be either y or n, which wasn't the case. That's the reason this actually turned out to be an error, and that's 422 unprocessable entity. You can actually see the various response codes that I'm configuring and try to understand the reason behind using specific the error codes. The other one is 405 method not allowed. That usually happens when you try to hit a service or hit an endpoint that is configured as post or any other method, but it's not called using that particular. So if, for example, I try to access create product using get, I should get 405. Here you can see HTTP get is not allowed on service create product because this service was specified as using HTTP post. Then 406 not acceptable. It is it is usually the case when you're trying to specify an invalid accept header. For example, let's say as part of get request, you are specifying an accept header that as an API consumer, you can accept only application XML, for example. And you try to hit the service or an endpoint, you are actually seeing that the endpoint is returning 406, HTTP 406 not acceptable. That actually means that this particular endpoint is able to accept only application JSON. And once, as I mentioned earlier, there is a plan to support more media types as well. This particular error message will probably go away when I add support for application XML as well, or any other media type for that matter. 415 unsupported media pipe. It's basically when you're trying to access post method or put method or patch method that are basically accepting request bodies, and if you specify invalid content type that for example, if I specify application XML for an API endpoint that is accepting only application JSON, then that endpoint is going to send you unsupported media type. And again, this particular the status will also go away once I add support for other media types. Then I believe unknowingly I have already covered the content negotiation part. As I mentioned earlier, that all the endpoints are accepting only application JSON. So either you don't specify accept or content type header value, or if you do specify, then make sure that you have to specify application JSON. Otherwise, you are going to get these HTTP status codes 406 and 415. So I believe that was all part of my agenda for today. If you have any questions or concern, you can let me know. And I will also provide you the access to the REST IMPL demo plugin that I am simultaneously developing to specify various services and examples that can help you get started. So that's it from my side, guys. Any questions, concerns?
I'm good. Mhm.
Okay, so should we end here?
Yes.
Yeah, sure, we can do that. Thank you, Girish, for the wonderful session.
Okay, thank you so
Very
much. See you in the next.